Hello and welcome to a lovely discussion at HYPIA, the International Association of Hyperpolyglots. I'm the president, Dr. Usman Chohan, and I have the pleasure of introducing my dear colleague and friend, Dr. Carlos Yebra Lopez, the hyperpolyglot activist and director of research at HYPIA, to talk today about the emergence of a very important and new branch of HYPIA called HYPIA Research. So welcome, Dr. Carlos Yebra Lopez.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about the emergence of this new initiative and how it came about from your perspective. Tell us about what's going on.
Right, so I believe that this is best understood as a combination between our mutual interest in the academic perspective and public outreach initiatives. So last year, I founded the Hyperpolyglot Activist, which was about recasting linguistics as public scholarship on the one hand, and on the other hand, problematizing received wisdom about multilingualism. Well, we talk about native speakers, non-native speakers, but what is actually a native speaker? Do they exist? Are they the product of a colonial/neoliberal rationality? What is at stake? What is the difference between the polyglot community and the polyglot industry? Who benefits from it? Etc., etc. So these are all metalinguistic questions that I thought would be relevant to pose to society at large. And from the convergence of these two elements, then I came across HYPIA, and especially what caught my attention was the community building aspect of it. So I thought, what if we combine our critical thinking skills at the Hyperpolyglot Activist and the community building aspect of HYPIA? And I think from that convergence, HYPIA Research emerged. How do you see it?
Yes, I think it's brilliant that you saw this intersection of the two objectives. HYPIA started out with community building, as you correctly recognized. Then it also expanded onto a second mandate of language preservation, rare languages. This came about 2 years after its original conception, originally 2016. This rare language stuff happened around late 2018. But then I also started to see that there's very interesting questions to be raised about the academic nature of hyperpolyglots. Hyperpolyglossia is an underexplored aspect of linguistics. And I was looking at it as a non-expert. You are an expert and a true scholar in the field, but I also saw the gap in the literature. So I just decided to write working papers and post them on Social Science Research Network, because that's an area where all sorts of social scientists get together. And I believe that those papers caught your attention. Is that a fair statement?
Indeed, you're right. This all began to take shape when I first came across the working papers of HYPIA, where you discuss the notion of hyperpolyglossia from various perspectives: showmanship, economic perspective, gender angle. So that's when I first saw an instantiation, something specific, concrete on how would it look like for us to develop research on multilingualism. Yeah, definitely.
And so I think we benefit a lot from having somebody who is far more advanced in the field. Anybody can write working papers for HYPIA who is a member and even a non-member, right? But it's good to have somebody to lead that charge, who has that grasp of the field, who's put in those hours, who's got the doctorate, and that's you. So now you can tell us about how you see this working. How is HYPIA, how does it work, and how can it work? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so there are HYPIA research revolves around 3 pillars. The first of which is the study group / seminar. This is a meeting we have at the end of each month where we discuss a specific topic of research. For instance, just yesterday we had the first meeting, right? And we discussed who is a hyperpolyglot, what does it mean to be a hyperpolyglot? These meetings last for 2 hours, and as I said, they are each month. They start with a presentation by a HYPIA research member, and then we go into a debate, and then we discuss what the next topic is going to be about. In addition to this study group or seminar, we have a conference that we're planning to do. And so at the end of this road, there is a publication. It's a publication of proceedings of that conference or a monograph on hyperpolyglossia, something of that sort. And what it's important to understand here is that it operates like a matryoshka, this structure. So meaning that each part of the HYPIA research is based on the previous one. So the HYPIA conference is based on the discussions we had at the HYPIA study group and seminar. And the HYPIA publication is going to be based off the HYPIA conference, which is in turn based on the study group and seminar. And what I think it's remarkable about this initiative is that it's open to anybody who is interested in research on multilingualism, whether they qualify as hyperpolyglots or not, meaning you don't need to be a regular HYPIA member for you to be considered for membership in HYPIA Research. Could you elaborate a little bit more on this, please?
Yes, I think that distinction is important to make. It's part of HYPIA's inclusivity ethos. HYPIA has grown a lot since 2016, but the main cohort at the centerpiece is the hyperpolyglots, who go through a process of proving that they are hyperpolyglots, and then they join a community and they participate to the degree they want. But outside of that central circle is an adjacent circle in this Venn diagram, much smaller, is the rare language specialist who may speak just one, but it's rare, and they can be HYPIA members. But oftentimes I've found, oftentimes means, about 30 to 40% of rare language specialists also happen to be hyperpolyglots. So this is how those intersect. And the third intersection is now that you could be a scholar of hyperpolyglossia and be a HYPIA member. Some people may well be hyperpolyglots as well as scholars of hyperpolyglossia. And the first example of that was you and me. Right. And then it's expanded to that. So far, my understanding is that most of the people who are HYPIA research scholars are also members, but we expect this to expand. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, definitely. I'm receiving more and more expressions of interest from people who conduct research on multilingualism, but are not themselves hyperpolyglots necessarily. So I think that was one of the avenues of expansion for the future, yeah.
And I think one thing we could talk about is what sorts of areas of hyperpolyglossia we are interested in without circumscribing our interest. Like there's so much more to it, but there's some that come to my mind, and then some you can tell us as well. So our first one was, who is a hyperpolyglot? It was the first paper. And what we were trying to do initially in that paper was, I was trying to tell that it's actually very hard to pick hyperpolyglots, and we face challenges to it. Then we looked at using the data set of hyperpolyglots, some issues that exist in the literature about myth making. So it's actually not as gender specific as you think, and that became a paper. Similarly, we found that there's a neoliberal logic that drives people towards a utilitarian purpose. Oh, I learned these because I can make money from it or do a job. That became a paper. And so you see that a lot of it is in the societal context, the intersection of society and linguistics, sociolinguistics, but our data set tends to be richer because we have 200 plus members. So those are some issues. And what are some issues now that you see could be interesting for us to explore?
So I think that in principle, anything that is linguistic related goes, but in practice, multilingual and social linguistic topics are more prevailing. And so, for instance, why do we not think or dream in any given language? Why the category of native, non-native speaker is hardly scientific? These kinds of questions are transversal to many languages and recurring in the polyglot community. And I think it's important to establish the difference between thinking about these questions and conducting research, systematic research about them. So whereas most people have their own intuitions and feelings about these issues, very few of them have conducted systematic research and discussed that with their peers. And that's what we're trying to do in HYPIA research to fill that gap, right?
Yes. So for example, in the seminars, we're going to have our second one soon, next month. You have asked the speaker who is taking charge, one of the members, to actually bring materials for us to read in advance, which is kind of like a rudimentary literature review. So it's actually doing the research to see what is being said. And then we discuss our perspectives based on that. So a deductive approach, which is the simple way to go. This is what they say. Does it apply to our context? And later, I think we would like to go towards inductive processes. So we use our hyperpolyglot context to then push the research out there, the boundary of it, like true scholars. Right?
Yeah, I think at any rate, what's key here is that HYPIA research is member-driven. So whereas there is a general set of topics that might be of interest, ultimately what determines what topic is going to be discussed is the interest of members. That's why we reflect that interest. So we have a questionnaire to become member of HYPIA Research, and we're going to talk about this, right? And based on the information provided from each member, we determine a set of topics that might be of interest to all of us. And then we vote on those. And then the most voted topic is going to be the topic that is discussed in the next meeting. So whereas our topics touch on general topics of interest, ultimately what counts is what are you interested in? What can you conduct systematic research on?
Yes, and I think we should talk a bit about the questionnaire that people have to fill out. The best way for them to get a hold of it is to reach out to HYPIA or to reach out to you personally and to get a copy of it. The most important question on the questionnaire is, number one, what are the areas of interest to you? Would you talk a bit about the questionnaire overall?
Yeah, so anybody who is interested in joining HYPIA Research can do it in two ways. They can send us an email to contact@thehyperpolyglotactivist.com or at membership@polyglotassociation.org, or to send us a private message to our inboxes in Facebook and Twitter. These are the options. Now, once you do that with your expression of interest, we will send you an application questionnaire. Within that application questionnaire, we will ask you to rank in order of interest your topics of choice. And then you can also add on top of that where you come from, what your angle is, what you're particularly interested in, etc. And based on those research preferences and skills, we will determine whether you are invited to join us as a HYPIA research member and what topic might be also of interest to all other HYPIA research members, so that is discussed at one of our study groups.
So it seems pretty straightforward, and I believe that this will become probably the second biggest element of HYPIA. Who knows, if the scholarship is so widespread, it might become the largest. That's a bit fanciful, but you know, research will become a big part of HYPIA. It adds a whole different angle. It shows that this organization approaches things in a totally different light. We're not just saving languages. We're not just community building, which is still always going to be important, but we're also thinking about being. We're also thinking about who we are, who we might be, right? What do you think?
I think so. I think that this is where the hyperpolyglot activists and HYPIA converge once again, in the fact that we do theory as practice. We not only preach, we don't not only talk about this, but we walk also. We want to create a community and want to see multilingualism live as it is really practiced amongst people, concerns as they are really happening in people's heads and environments. And that's what HYPIA research allows people to do.
Yeah, well said. We don't just talk the talk, we walk the walk. Do you have any final remarks? I think we've set the stage for people to think about who HYPIA Research is.
Definitely. I would just encourage anybody to get acquainted with HYPIA and polyglotassociation.org and with the Hyperpolyglot Activist, hyperpolyglotactivist.com. Get to read some of the working papers from HYPIA in the publication section of HYPIA. Get to watch some of the videos at the Hyperpolyglot Activist and see if these concerns resonate with them and if they can add something to the conversation. And if that's the case, then by all means, contact us, send us your expression of interest, and we'll take it from there.
Perfect. I think that's an excellent summary and a way forward for the public that is interested in engaging with HYPIA Research. Thank you, Professor Carlos Yebra Lopez, for your time. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Usman Chohan, for having me, and I look forward to collaborating further. Okay, all right.